Good morning. We are back from recess, and I'd like to thank Senator Jesse Lujan, Senator Chris Duenas, who is here on time as we begin our budget session deliberations for the next week or so. And I also like to thank the panel who is here this morning on time, ready to get started. But unfortunately, the legislature does not have quorum at this time. So we're going to recess until we can get quorum. Thank you.
Good morning. The Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We have a quorum. We will continue on now with Senator Blas. But before Senator Blas starts asking questions, I'd ask the panel that were asked questions to give a response. And I think, Senator Lujan, on your issue, the 5.9 that's already taken care of, I think it's Ms. Daphne Simzu would have to respond to a question that was asked by Senator Perez in reference to possibly tax credits or whatever that question was. Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so after going back and looking at the question, or listening to the question that Senator Perez had, her question was regarding outstanding tax credits that are out there. That actually is coming from, or should come from GITA. And so just wanted to confirm, and I apologize for the confusion, but I misunderstood the question.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Simzu. And before we continue on with Senator Blas, I'd just like to make a serious clarification that we are on Chapter 1, but we are on page 3. After we complete page 3, and before we begin with Senator Tello, we will have OFB report out on the remaining pages of Chapter 1, because I know that many of you are going to have questions about the funds and stuff like that, and I think it'd be best if Steve's able to brief it all and explain everything before Senator Tello would be the first one on the second round. All right? So with that, Senator Blas, we will continue on Chapter 1, page 2, up to page 3, with the revenue base. Thank you, Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, just based on that, you have managed to save Mr. Guerrero the unfortunate circumstance of having to speak for the next 45 minutes, so I'll save that question for round 2. Okay. But I'm going to go ahead and preface the question that, and I really don't expect the answer until round 2, because then we can talk a little bit more about this thing. We've seen a significant increase in the amounts that we intend to receive, or we anticipate to receive over the course of the next fiscal year. And I guess, one of the areas that, or the area primarily that we're going to be receiving a lot of these funds are from the taxes derived, whether it be individual or business corporation. And a question that is really never asked in the revenue portion of this is how we intend to get to there. What are those processes, or what do we anticipate over the next fiscal year, and as far as actions from the government in being able to receive these revenues? It's one thing to say that this is how we've been tracking. It's another thing to say this is what we intend to do over the course of the next fiscal year to be able to get there. And so I guess my general question is, how does the government intend or perceive that they are going to be able to get to hit these revenue marks? What are those services, what are those processes that are going to be taken to be able to get to these revenue sources?
Is there anyone specific you would like to ask?
I'll leave it open to anybody on the panel that can answer the question.
All right.
And I think more, in fairness, I understand, the function of OFB is basically to be able to put it together. What I'm asking more so is the executive branch portion, is basically, how do we intend to get there? OFB, I understand, just takes the information that's derived over the reports, but from the administration side, how do we intend to get to these numbers? What are those processes? What do we expect over the next fiscal year to see in as far as government service so that we can hit these marks? Because a lot of times what happens that I see is that while we speak about the revenue projections and everything, if we somehow come short in everything, the first place that we go to is for the legislature either to depart upward or downward in as far as revenue projections, when really the question should be, what has the government been doing to be able to hit these marks? OFB did not get to this, to what they project or what they anticipate is going to be getting without the information received from the executive branch. So what does the executive branch intend to do to be able to get to these marks?
Thank you, Senator. Perhaps I could at least lead off a response to your question.
Sure.
And having said that, many of the collections that are being expected in this budget are the responsibility of the Department of Revenue Taxation, and I'd ask the Director to add to my comments after I finish as to the success of her department in actually collecting these amounts. But I guess I would want to stay at the beginning of all this, that the very fact that we have been able to realize these revenues from all sources in the past is the result of the administration's effort to collect these taxes. It's not perfect. There are still some taxes and fees, because we don't want to forget those, that need yet to be collected. We had a discussion yesterday about the Section 30 funds, and we're obviously going to try and claw back from the federal government as much as we can under the Section 30 funding. But I think if you review the increase in our collections over the last 4 years, that has been we've been pretty successful in banking growing amounts of revenue. Those efforts will continue. I don't see any, I think one part of your question is, does the administration think that these numbers are realistic? And it does. We think that we can collect these revenues based upon the economic activity that we're currently seeing, plus the additional fees that we're likely to collect. We had a discussion yesterday about the customs fees and the tourist attraction fund. I thought about this overnight. There is a relationship between the two, but there's not a one-to-one relationship between the two, because the customs fee is collected on every ticket, but 4 people could occupy 1 hotel room. So there's not a one-to-one relationship, but there is a relationship. So those kinds of, that kind of association, if you like, between different types of revenues, we've looked at after we got these numbers, and we feel comfortable that they're achievable. And we, in each of our own agencies, will do whatever we can to make sure that we do collect whatever is due to the government so that we can meet these budgeted numbers.
I appreciate that, and you brought up a couple things. From there, I'm going to ask a couple questions. You talked about that while we are making strides in being able to collect on the taxes and fees that owe to the government of Guam. What, Ms. Shimizu, how much do we, I guess, estimate with regards to uncollected taxes and fees?
So with regards to AR, what I did gather from my team, our AR balance as of FY 2022, September, was about $152 million. And I believe that had gone down from what we had previously provided earlier in, I believe, when Senator Atta when there was session and Senator Atta was still here. What I wanted to share with the body is that, of course, even back in 2019, under former AG Camacho, we had worked with the AG's office on an effort to begin to transmit cases there for injunction. So, of course, we had large efforts that actually had resulted in some large cases. For example, there was the Verona case. There was a few tax cases as well that went to court that had just actually been resolved within the last year or so that the government is going to be realizing, if not already, will be realizing some monies from. And those are efforts that will continue. But another effort that we're going to be embarking on is the issuance of our annual notices. We had not done or sent out annual notices since 2019, which was pre-COVID. So in September, we're targeting to send out what are called annual notices. It follows the same process that the IRS does follow. We continue to do our same collections. Collections is part of our usual, what we do on a regular basis. We never stop collecting, but this is an extra effort so that way we send notices to every single individual company that owes taxes, and it puts them on notice. Sometimes what happens with people who may already receive notices from us is they may either go off island, they may get ill, they may lose their notices, they may not have properties that we can place liens on, etc. So there may be some gap in the time that we're able to, or that they communicate with us, but this will put everybody on notice. So we're expected to send out those notices in September, and every single person that has been assessed a tax will receive a notice in the mail. We expect that that's going to help with collections. And in addition, to kind of add on to what Director Byrne had mentioned, we do expect, additional. I know that there was a question yesterday as to where are we with regards to the military buildup, and we do still expect more construction to occur. In fact, as I've spoken with at least one construction company locally that is a large construction company that has multiple awards from the military, what they've advised is that there's not even enough capacity on Guam to manage all of the contracts that are actually out there for construction on Guam for the federal government. So there is that, and we're seeing that in our BPT. We're seeing the increase in construction. In fact, pre-COVID, we had seen, from pre-COVID times to now, we're seeing our construction, BPT from construction even double. So that's where we're seeing a lot of our monies, the general fund monies, the large monies that make up the collections that we have. And in addition, of course, we saw GVB's outlook. I think initially there was discussion about it taking about 36 months or 3 years, I guess, for the recovery from the COVID and then also Typhoon Mawar. But it looks like we're actually seeing tourists come, because of the various efforts of our government, tourism come back, and great job to GVB for getting out there and being and marketing Guam, because I've gone to different places and I see tourists everywhere. So it sounds like from GVB's perspective as well, and they're the experts, that the numbers for tourism is going to as well go up. We're excited about some of the investments that's happening in Guam, like for example, Don Don Donkey, which will also again bring jobs and other different types of products to Guam. We're seeing people actually out. On a personal note, when I go to restaurants, I'm always amazed that even at these very high-priced buffets that perhaps are in excess of $60 per person, I see that the buffets are full. So again, I believe in the area of construction, we're definitely seeing a growth. Also, I believe as well with the military buildup, we're going to start seeing growth. In addition to that, of course, withholding taxes, where I think that OFB had indicated a significant increase. Withholding is, of course, related to employment. So, of course, there is expectation that with these new additional construction, additional retail, that we'll see more employment as well. And so we really do believe that the numbers will come. And these numbers are not much higher than, I believe, where we're tracking based on the CRER.
Okay, appreciate that. And You had mentioned earlier that you had a discussion with at least one military contractor or contractor on military projects, and that I guess an issue there is that we don't have the capacity to be able to do this. Does then that go to show, because there's a tendency to say that we had $80 million project awarded for next fiscal year. Is it very easy, can we assume then that although it was awarded for next year, that we don't have the capacity to be able?
So in the area of military construction contracts, it's a little bit complicated, right? So we'll see where an award is, where there is a project that's awarded for $60 or $80 million. And that doesn't mean that we're going, of course that doesn't mean, and you're very well aware, Senator Blas, it doesn't mean we're going to see that $80 million now. We'll see it over time. But even given, I guess, again, a lot of our contractors, what is happening is, because some of the primes are also serving as subs on some contracts because they're just having to figure out how they're going to manage. And Typhoon Mawar, post-typhoon, we're seeing, of course, because of all the dump trucks and painters, electricians, and all of the other different types of trades that are needed to help to get people back to normal after the typhoon. There is a need. So I believe, again, based on my discussion, at least with one very large contractor, there's so much work that is out there to bid for. It's not possible, given the capacity of the contractors that we have available on Guam, that they're going to be able to meet all of those needs, which maybe isn't such a bad thing, because it means there's a lot of work that has to be done. There's a lot of money that is going to be awarded for things that are going to happen on Guam. Perhaps the federal government's just going to have to figure out how they lay out those plans a little bit, so that way we're going to be able to still get those projects and have the contractors that we have available be able to meet those. But that's what I understand, again, based on some of the communication we've had with the construction
Okay, well, I don't expect
industry.
an answer in this round with regard to the follow-up questions to that, but, just anticipate this, please, for the next round and for subsequent rounds, for subsequent discussions. Is how do we intend to be able to capture, recognizing that there is a problem, okay, and being able to fulfill this need. Okay, what is going to be the administration's response to this over the next fiscal year to be able to do this? Okay, I don't need an answer to that right now. That's okay. Something go back to your colleagues and say, okay, guys, that Blas guy over the legislature is going to ask us a bunch of technical questions that really I think it's really outside of your will. Well, but it's going to be asked. It has to be asked. Going back to the $152 million uncollected fees and taxes, Daphne, is this your total? Is this from local, or is this inclusive of military?
The 152. That's everything, sir. That's all tax that's been assessed. That's outstanding. But it's a moving number, right? So
Right.
Accounts receivable is beginning accounts receivable plus any new assessments less any payments is going to equal what that amount. So it's a moving number, but that's including everything, both local tax and income tax.
Okay, I remember that there was some issue and concern about being able to collect on taxes for, military construction and stuff. Have we been able to resolve that?
Well, so, even when Public Auditor Cruz did actually issue the audit report, and of course, there was an oversight hearing that Senator Roy Quinata did hold back in maybe April. And at that time also, there were things, and I completely respect the public auditor, and I appreciate the public auditor's efforts, because they absolutely helped to keep, of course, things in check in the government. And but I did not necessarily agree with the methodologies or even the findings, and in fact the amount. And so I did mention that at that time. I know that the public auditor's report had actually indicated $24 million that is outstanding in taxes that's not being collected. And just to share, really that's $24 million that was over 5 years. That was not clarified. But when we went back to look at it, there was like a $1 million error. There were certain things, for example, that are not related to collecting taxes. For example, if it's a joint venture, and there's a joint venture, perhaps, you know, Senator Blas, Senator Duenas, you decide to go into business just to do a contract. And again, we see that happen because of the capacity of companies to be able to do certain things on Guam, right? The lack of there being enough contractors. You may go into business, you may both be licensed separately, but your JV is not licensed, but you're both paying taxes on your share. And that was a finding, or that was indicated as an outstanding liability. And again, from the perspective of our agency, we did not agree, because just because your specific joint venture is not licensed, the fact that you're both paying taxes, I think, was a point that, you know, again, wasn't addressed. But again, those are items which I did share with the body during the oversight hearing. So when we went back and we looked at, okay, what could potentially be amount? And again, you know, of course, there is discussion about DFAS and trying to get a hold of DFAS. And, you know, I can appreciate that, of course, the public auditor did mention that I think it was Admiral Nicholson who had advised that he would perhaps be able to get us connected with the Defense Finance Accounting Service, DFAS. But immediately after the oversight hearing, I called the Admiral's office, who reminded me that we actually met with the Admiral's office even back in 2019 to work on this effort. It was just under a different Admiral. But we did do some follow-ups, and I believe that perhaps because of the change in leadership, and it's now, I don't remember the new Admiral's name, and I apologize, but there was a change in leadership that happened over the last few months, and of course the typhoon, that was not able to be done. But my understanding is Admiral Nicholson didn't exactly have a relationship with DFAS. He was going to try to just utilize his relationships with DC to try to assist us with that. But we've also worked on that. But in addition to that, we've also talked with the public auditor. We had different phases of our project at the time that we had at the time the public auditor was working on our on the performance audit, which I know he mentions, I think lasted like 18 months or 24 months, something like that. We were working already on a effort. We have different phases to our effort. At that time, we were working on what we called phase 1, and we're continuing to work on the audits. So, you know, I believe we're making strides in terms of working to collect on taxes altogether, but in addition to specifically looking at military federal contractors. But I do want to say it is, you know, with the capacity, of course, there's going to be a need for other contractors to come from Guam. And we're seeing, like I mentioned, BPT from construction double, which means that, of course, there's a lot more construction work. Perhaps there's more construction companies that are even going to be starting on Guam. And the agency's ability, given, you know, we have about 180 people in our agency, given the limited resources, and as I mentioned, we're also short-staffed, it will be difficult. Definitely, in order to be able to be really efficient at it, we're going to have to expand certain areas so that we are able to have the number of people that are really needed to be able to collect on these additional monies that are going to come in.
Okay, I appreciate it. And again, I'm going to save the bulk of my questions for the second round, because then we get into the areas of the fees and stuff, and how we intend to be able to collect on those.
Senator, if I could also add,
Sure.
one change that we do expect this year is the introduction of the new financial system, which will give us better visibility to the numbers. We're already, you know, trying to make sure that, certainly at DOA, if an unexpected number occurs, we try and look into it, not just record it, which is part of all the improvements that we're making to the financial control system. And that improvement has been noted by the rating agencies over the last couple of years.
Okay, and I appreciate it. Again, like I said, I'll save the bulk of my questions for the second round, because
And
then...
may I just add something as well, Senator
Sure.
Blas? I apologize.
I like it when you guys want to talk more.
Well,
Go ahead.
Senator Perez actually brought up yesterday, Customs and Quarantine is working on a system, and I know that you're very familiar, you come from that background. They're working on a system that will allow for, it's ASICUDA, the harmonized system. And so the harmonized system, at the point that they're able to get this system in place, and I know Senator Parkinson is is also very well of this because they did do a presentation. When they're able to get this system in place, the management of the items that are coming into Guam, this goes to collections, it will be a lot. We should see a lot more efficiency and a lot more organization in that. So that's exciting, and I believe that will also help definitely with regards to collections of taxes.
I appreciate it because, you know, again, just based on the first 3 pages, one of the concerns that I had was not just how we're going to get there, but how we intend to, you know, recover some of our leakages, for lack of a better term. Okay, and being able to do this. I appreciate you know the discussion and what you had provided. Again, I'll save the bulk of my questions in the second round because then we start to get into the nuts and bolts of different agencies. And okay, and I'm just to preface that my focus is going to be primarily on performance based. Okay, you know, you're asking for this money. I want to know how we intend to collect it and what we're going to do with it. Okay, because if we can't collect it and we don't know what we're going to do with it, why am I going to give it? Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Duenas.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman. I guess in order to lay a foundation for my questions that I have to go to OFB first. Steve, there seems to, in my time here in the legislature, it seems to be a major shift from a conservative approach, and basically what I've known OFB to mention over the years is that we have to be careful when we add fixed cost, because fixed costs become permanent, if you will, going forward. And I share the concerns of some of my colleagues that while there is robust economic activity now, I'm the kind of person that would like to reappropriate or appropriate excesses, then take it to the line and see what's going on. But I have to just ask, just basic question, what's the reasoning behind the change? It seems like a philosophical change.
Thank you, Senator. As in the past, at least in the last 4 years I've been here in OFB, most of you know that my projections have always been conservative. If you look at the FY24 projection that we did, believe it or not, Senator, I'm still conservative. Some of the amounts that you're seeing in these categories are still below what we are tracking. But again, being on the conservative type, taking my position being conservative, I didn't take basically what we were tracking. What we did is we looked at the tracking and says, you know what, let's bring it down a little bit, even though we're tracking that much, just to be on the safe side. And like you said, you know, we can estimate, we can track, we can project $1 million to come in. But you always have to have that cushion just in case it doesn't. So we don't appropriate $1 million, we appropriate 900,000. So to your answer is that, yes, the numbers seem a little bit higher, but in all fairness, they're not up to what we were actually tracking. So in my view, they're still somewhat conservative. Although a little bit higher than even what the governor's requesting in our tracking, in our data, and the final numbers that we came out, we were still conservative in the numbers that we presented in the bill.
So I want to approach something that I heard you say yesterday, and I want to contrast this with Department of Administration and maybe Revenue Tax, and BMR as well. You mentioned growth, which I agree with. There's no question. But I think it's important to understand the baseline of how we got here, particularly over the last several years since 2018. We increased BPT to 5%. Is it fair to say that that's approximately $60 million annually of revenue?
The amount, Senator, based on the economic activity and everything that's going on, that number might probably go up just a little bit, simply because at the base we did this was several years ago. That amount we estimated was about 60 million. But because we've actually grown in activity, even better than, I would say, even pre-pandemic at the rate we're recovering, that amount may slightly go up a little bit more.
Daphne, would you agree with that 60 million plus I think that was the, Mr. Byrne was there when we were crawling out of a difficult financial situation, and I believe that at the time the government took on $30 million and asked for half of the year at $30 million was what they estimated for.
Right, and so the change in BPT from 3 to 5%, or sorry, from 4 to 5%, I believe occurred in April 2018. That was the first month that BPT was increased. I would have to go back, honestly, to look at that. I don't want to say without looking. My understanding when we came into 2019 that yes, that was the approximate amount, but I have not gone back to just check that is the amount, and we can kind of go back and look at that, Senator Duenas. But my understanding initially is that yes, that was about the amount.
I'm accepting rough math for this exercise. Just wanted to make sure that would be the concurrence. So another thing that happened that was a great benefit to the people of Guam was, and I just want to look for concurrence here, very conservatively in the past we would appropriate $145 million for tax refunds. Was that typical, say for over the last 5 fiscal years?
I believe it was about 145, but then always taken into consideration the portion that we have historically received, which is for ACTC, which was about 120. So 140 minus 20 million was 125, 120. And that was, I believe, historically what we used to see in the budgets for refunds.
Okay. And I did that just to show that the differential now in the current request is 62. I believe that's right. Anyways, my rough math takes that to where we have now also been able to have an avoided cost, which is a boon to the general fund of $82 million as a result of that. Would that be close?
Could you clarify?
So whereby the general fund would have to bear, the people of Guam through their taxes that they pay, we're assuming the program of EITC, ACTC, in terms of the enumeration that it's currently at. If we did not have that federal change in law to be able to realize that, we would have to be appropriating that for that program. It wouldn't be a federal program. We wouldn't get the reimbursement.
Correct.
So it's an avoided cost because the government of Guam no longer has to carry that cost. So that's almost like a financial boon for the government of Guam.
Correct, but the EITC is, I believe, for tax years 2022 going forward, and then the child tax credit, I believe, just really started in this last year.
Sure. I'm doing this exercise for my follow-up questions, going back to the reason why I asked OFB the foundation of our tracking and our optimism and the like, to show that this is reliable funding that is very clear, that is now available for fixed costs. What we're assuming going above that now is based on tracking and based on current very robust economic activity, primarily on the federal side. Of course, there is tourism that is rebounding, thank God, and I agree with you. The folks at GVB are doing a bang-up job, and we're getting there. So I guess my next question would be, Ed and maybe Art as well. So the baseline of how OFB says that they had a departure from your request because your request was prepared in January and the tracking continues to improve. I noticed a couple of times you deferred to OFB on the numbers. I want it on the record. Do you concur with the numbers that have been prepared and this substitute bill?
Again, let me start off on that, and perhaps Mr. Mariano will comment later. But the answer is yes. The deferral that I personally made is because they actually originated these numbers. The executive budget request that came from the administration came in February. And Mr. Guerrero explained that a lot of the difference between the two is the improved tracking between February and August, and I would concur with that.
Okay. And I was just reading through the media, so I thought you were going to be actually representing BBMR, because as we know, the counters to the two branches of government are OFB and BBMR, but I'm glad Art is here. I started with you, and I want to go to Art, knowing that he's the acting director at this point, and see if Art also concurs with basically the adjustments that OFB has made and these adopted levels.
Yes, Senator, as I see it, and when the numbers were first presented to our office, approximately about a week or two ago, after a meeting between OFB and the governor and some of the fiscal team, when we were taking a look at the numbers, and we consider such things as how we came up with our figures back in January using a 3-year average, and also factored in the growth in our revenues from the time period that the EBR, the executive budget request, was submitted to current. And I believe the body also acknowledges that there's with our actual collections from then to now, with the revisions to the revenue levels up to approximately $752 million available for appropriation to date, we are comfortable with the projections that OFB has provided. For the most part, there are a couple categories that seem a little higher than what we are seeing in terms of our average and the tracking to date, but overall, bottom line, we're comfortable with the numbers.
So Ed, going back to you, since you manage the cash at the end of the day, and I don't know if you take the same attitude as Mr. Swanson, you take the bullets, as the good superintendent said, but you do take the bullets because you write the checks. So I guess my question to you then would be, I want to be clear, because I know we're going to go in, we have to go into the expenditure side. This budget is, we saved a lot of paper because the expenditures are embedded in the chapters. So normally we'll have an expenditure chapter which would enumerate the numbers and then define it, but I know our good chairman likes to save paper, so that's good. We'll hit that there. But my issue is then, and I want to make sure we understand this would assume then that any shortfalls in special funds will be covered by the general fund.
Yes, Senator, you're absolutely right. There are usually some special sorts of bullets that are aimed at the Director of Administration. But the answer to your question is yes, the general fund would be required under accounting rules to make up the difference of any shortfall in the fund balance of any special fund.
I guess just what jumps out to me, and you touched on this earlier, so maybe that's been answered, but it seems to me incredible how, whether there hasn't been a reconciliation, and I hope there is maybe a reconciliation by Friday when we discuss particularly customs, that's just jumping out to me, that the collection rate is right now far below the tracking in terms of what the actuals are. I want to come back to that. Have you reconciled those numbers yet?
By reconciliation, Senator, you mean what?
Meaning that there hasn't been the paper or the electronic booking of the revenues or the like, because the disparity looks pretty stark at this point.
No, we haven't. As I think was mentioned yesterday, actually those numbers come from, and the cash remittances come from the airport, because they collect the customs fees in the airline tickets and pass it on to us. There's usually a lag, but I will take the point, and I will get those numbers reconciled.
Thanks. I mean, just a quick question. Are you currently allocating any subsidies, or are they operating off of their fees?
In fiscal 22, which we've just been putting the numbers together, there were 2 special funds that the general fund had to subsidize, and customs was one of them.
Okay. So I want to come back to OFB, and so let's get this on the record once again. The actual request now that has been adjusted between the request from the governor is a total of $99 million. Okay. I don't want to, I mean, this can be just general, but I'd like to ask, because I think the people of Guam would like to hear this, because I've gone through it and I know some of the answers. But can you give me just your top 4 in terms of where we've been able to help the critical agencies in terms of their levels being adjusted?
Are you referring to appropriation, or are you referring to specific areas in the revenues that were kind of like supporting those increases?
Let's just be general. Did we increase revenues on the top 3? Education, public safety, healthcare?
The answer is yes, Senator.
Okay. So we'll get in, the devil will be in the details when we get in the other chapters. I understand your answer, but I just, for the purposes of this exercise, because really, you know, Mrs. Chairman, let's just be straight, right? If we're, the only thing we do, if we don't adopt these numbers, is to go in and make amendments and drop them. But right now, we're going to take it on OFB's word. I think where we're really going to get into the nuts and bolts is when we get into the chapters and see whether or not we agree on that. Because if we've got the administration here, you know, celebrating the tracking of OFB, if we've got, you know, the numbers enumerated in the chapters, you know, appropriating those increases, you know, then we're going to have to take it on their word or make an amendment to reduce it. So we'll see where that goes. But aside from that, much like my good colleague, Senator Blas, I think most of my questions will be in the second and third round, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming you're going to allow us to go into expenditures to make sure that we have some clear lines on what line item appropriations are there.
Senator Duenas, everything on this rounds, 3 rounds, is all in reference to Chapter 1, which deals with all revenue. It's all revenue first. That's all it's talking about.
Well, Mr. Chair, you've made a comment earlier that you would be dismissing the panel after adopting this chapter or getting to this chapter, but...
And then when we move into the
Yeah.
agency,
I'm going to have
OFB is going to stick around.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to have to put it on the record, but I think we need an answer at least with one glaring issue, and I'll talk to you about it offline before we discuss it, but I think before we dismiss the panel, we need to discuss health insurance, so we'll talk about it later.
Oh, okay, on that's another question. Okay.
Second round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. And just to advise that my colleagues, the question that was asked earlier about the GITA, the tax break, it has been loaded to your drive. So please take a look at it, and if you have any questions of that, be prepared after we finish this first round. But we will continue on. Senator Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Appreciate you guys coming down. The most recent CRER tracks FY23 general fund revenue to be about $889,260,989. This proposed budget projects FY 2024 general fund to be, revenue to be 909,250,616, an increase of just about 20 million, or 2.4%. Would you say that 2.4% is a conservative rate of growth?
If you're talking about on annual growth, I think that is within reason, appropriate.
I also have another question. When will the FY 2022 GovGuam audit be available?
We're finalizing it now, Senator. We are going to try and get it out by the end of August. There are some issues that are not really associated with the underlying numbers that need to be resolved with the auditors.
Wasn't that due in July?
It was due June 30th.
And, okay, so could you expound a little bit more on those holdups?
Yes. The numbers that we're discussing here are all the governmental fund numbers. In the government-wide numbers, we have to include two large liabilities, the pension unfunded liability and the OPEB liability, which is the liability that when we're looking forward, that we're going to incur for paying for the health insurance of our retirees. These are very big numbers. When the new auditors came in, they adopted a completely different approach to the whole valuation. And there's been a large number of discussions going back and forth about the valuation of this number. It doesn't change the numbers that we're looking at here because those numbers do not appear in the governmental funds, they only appear in the government-wide funds numbers.
Okay.
We also got a little held up, of course, because of the typhoon, which did impact us.
Is there projected to be a surplus or deficit for FY 2022?
Surplus.
Surplus. I do have to say, I think it is a great disservice to the body and people of Guam that FY 2022 audited financial statements for the government are not ready, especially as we begin budget season. These statements provide crucial information relevant to our discussion of revenue projections. So since the FY 22 audited projections are not available, let's look at FY 2021. The audited financial statements showed the general fund had excess revenues over expenditures of 24.4 million. In 2022, the last CRR issued that the fiscal year showed a 103 million surplus in revenue tracking versus projected revenue. We'll see what the audit financial statements say, but there was a substantial under-projection of revenue last fiscal year according to the CRER. So, Steve, I got a question for you. How many budget seasons have you been the guy?
Are you talking about the OFB?
Yes, sir.
This will be my 5th year.
Your 5th year. In all the years that you've done OFB, have you ever put out a budget that was under-projected?
Under-projected?
Yeah. Did you ever have at the end of the year where you were short what you were projected?
Over-projected, you mean?
Yes, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Not in the 4 years that I've been here, Senator.
Okay. See, because at first I really appreciated the very conservative budgets you had, but I did a little bit of homework on how the legislature used to work, and for many decades, most of the bills were appropriation bills. It allowed politicians to play Santa Claus for their pet projects and for their re-election. Yet we recognized in this body long ago that this was a poor budget practice. We have since, for several decades, now come to the understanding that a budget is best done as one bill. So we can look as the government as a whole and make, as one of my old friends said, a holistic approach at the budget. In order to do that, a more accurate budget projection is best. And while I used to love these very conservative budgets, they had an unintended effect. They basically brought us back to the legislature of old, where every spring when we have this excess money, we are all scrambling as fast as we possibly can to spend it as quick as possible and score the political points. And I do not like these ad hoc budgets. If there is again a $100 million surplus from these budget projections, it would be chaos this next spring and an unnecessary injection of politics, as this money will be rushed to be spent. We will have some people saying, let's go spend all this money now, and we will have people saying, we should be spending this in the budget, and we're going to have this body fall apart again. It's no crying in baseball. Let's get this budget accurate so we're not having these huge surpluses at the end of the year that we're all trying to play political football with. Sorry, I'm getting off my questions here. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. If there is a $100 million, did you consider the missile defense system investments when calculating the projections for FY 2024? It is projected that the system will be about $931 million spent between now and 2027. I mean, that's got to make a dent in our projections, right?
Can you repeat your question again, Senator?
Yes, did the missile defense investments, did you consider the missile defense investments when considering your projections for FY 2024?
No.
Okay. Do you anticipate that $931 million spent between now and 2027 could have some effect on our revenues?
There might be some indirect, yes, impact on the local revenues.
Okay. Do we have an estimate for the projects and economic growth that may come from funds the bipartisan infrastructure bill provides Guam? Is that considered in the general fund projections?
Can I refer that question to Mr. Burns?
Sure, absolutely.
Could you repeat that, Senator?
Do you have an estimate for the projects and economic growth that may come from funds the bipartisan infrastructure bill provides Guam? Is that considered in the general fund projections?
No.
What about the $200 million in FEMA and SBA recovery money that is now circulating in our economy? Is that considered in the general fund projections?
I actually don't recognize that number, Senator. I'm pleased that it seems to be such a large number, but I'm not aware of that necessarily being in circulation.
You know, I want to thank OFB and the budget chairman for the consistent conservative budgets and surpluses for the last year. The vast under projection of last year's general fund revenues give me pause regarding this very conservative 2.4% increase. We don't want to under project so much that we put ourselves in a situation where we're back to the old ad hoc legislature of old. We should, as much as possible, view this entire budget in its entirety without any of these little pockets of surpluses at the end. I think with increased and more accurate budget projections, I think we can get this budget done significantly better than it's done in the past, in a way that, depoliticizes this come springtime when we get these surpluses. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson. Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like the previous speaker and a couple of my other colleagues, this is it's my first budget session. And I've never proclaimed to be a financial guy, but I guess just looking at this $1.1 billion that we're projecting, I think about return on investment and what this budget is going to do to address critical shortfalls in public safety, healthcare, and education, right? The kind of the big three, Mr. Steve. And so I guess I just wanted to ask, first of all, what kind of return on investment do you think the people of Guam are getting with this budget relative to education, public safety, and healthcare, the priorities?
My answer, thank you for the question, Senator. I would like to think that whatever this legislature finally passes as a budget bill for the annual operation of the government agencies, that the government agencies will utilize these funds and maximize the use of these funds to better meet the goals and objectives of their programs, their departments, and what have you. Ever since I've been even at the Bureau of Budget, it was always basically the concept that the Bureau of Budget is there to basically control the expenses of the government of Guam and to make sure the government of Guam operates within the revenues it has and collects. A lot of the agencies since my first day there has always submitted their wish lists on what they thought they needed to operate efficiently, effectively, and to meet all their mandates. Unfortunately, it's not like that in the real world, simply because we're all governed by conditions, and the government is no different from an individual checkbook that we all have. We can only spend what we have in that checkbook, regardless of the needs and wants that we may want. So again, these agencies, we try to fund them as much as we can, at the best we can, with what the resources we have. And it's never ever going to be enough. And it's always been like that since my tenure here. I've been in government for 42 years in finance. And unfortunately, Senator, it hasn't changed. It has improved, yes, but as far as meeting the whole needs and the wants, I don't think that will happen.
You're tracking $99 million more for fiscal year 24, and I know that this has been covered with previous speakers, but what do you think in Guam's economy is responsible for this $99 million increase? Do you think it's tourism, military contracts, federal funds circulating the economy? Just so we can have a better idea about what you're tracking with this increase so that we can operate and anticipate it to continue. So if you don't mind.
Those areas of concern, Senator, yes, is basically the basis of our tracking. And we do see, and I hope, you know, through our work here in OFB, is that tracking will continue, at least at the current rate, if not improving over the next year or so. We've seen increases in tourism, we've seen increases in military activity, and despite all the challenges I believe people have out there, the economy is still basically growing. If you look at the category of withholding tax, it's growing like we never even, the last 2 years, you know, we took a conservative approach, but we've always went over in withholding. So that's an indication people are working, people are going back to work, and the economy is supporting basically what we're anticipating to happen. So yes, I do believe that, you know, we're back on the right track. We are kind of stabilizing to a point that we can sustain at least what we have currently happening on Guam. And that's my honest belief.
Yeah, if you could just provide a little more detail, and I know it's been covered, just between your projected levels and the executive branch's request.
Are you referring in terms of like?
Well, the 778 million versus the 812.
Oh, the difference of the 33 million. Again, those are revenue categories that, as VBMR indicated, that, you know, their levels were done back in December and January. But since then, they've also recognized that things have changed, tracking have changed, and they are in concurrence with us. So what we did, and because we had the opportunity to provide these numbers 9 months later, we've made basically adjustments to them based on tracking, based on information, based on what we feel is happening out in the economy, which wasn't available 9 months ago. So we have a better tracking, we have a better position to support our numbers than what happened 9 months ago. So again, it all contributes to, you know, the increase in tourism. That has a downward effect on both the general fund and TAF. We see an increase in customs fees. We see an increase in the TAF, and basically just increases in the BBT, because the information we have today wasn't available 9 months ago. That lies where the 33 million difference is.
I guess those 22% pay raise employees are paying more taxes. Can you, Steve, if you don't mind, can you explain just some of the differences here under use of money and property? Some pretty big differences. So FY23, 197,000, FY24 executive request 45,000, and then OFP 430,000. I'm looking at your PowerPoint.
Yes, Senator. Again, what we did is we went on tracking. Over the last couple of years, back, I believe, in FY21, the actually audit came up and it was a negative 288,000. In other words, we were less, we didn't collect anything. In FY22, the CER reported 343,000 negative, okay? In FY23, we're tracking actually 1.9 million. So if you took the average of that, it averages about 430,000.
Senator, that's basically interest, and because interest rates have gone up, it's reasonable to assume that revenue source will go up.
Mr. Byrne, do you agree with everything that Mr. Guerrero has said so far?
I agree with most of what he said so far.
Okay. Steve, if you could, the Guam Education Facilities Fund, anticipating $35 million. Is that it? Are we anticipating any more? If not, or if so, why?
Senator, that fund actually is based on real property tax. So you just take a percentage of real property tax and you deposit into the fund.
But I mean, you know, we had a lot of construction buildings going up. Are you anticipating any increase to that fund?
I believe that the real property tax basically is the real property tax that you pay on real property. It's regardless, I think, of construction at this point. So when we record it, it's basically just the cost of real property that you pay annually.
Does all of that money go to education?
For the most part, it does.
Where else does it go?
What's the allocation? Portion of the money, Senator, goes to the bond for education.
Yeah, if you'd like, I can go ahead and add some details as well.
Sure. Give me a moment. I'll get you the details on it.
Yeah, I can go ahead and expand a little bit. Yes, it is for currently for debt service for the Ukuru and JFK bonds. DOE operations, as well as the UOG Capital Improvement Fund debt service, and the GCC Capital Improvement Fund.
And that's it?
Yes.
Do you agree, Mr. Byrne?
That seems to be mostly education. In fact, it's all exclusively education.
Yes, that's correct.
And while we're on education, I did want to follow up with you, sir, about the $20 million we appropriated to the Guam Department of Education. I know that on May 9th you had been in this hall as part of a previous committee of the whole, and you had expressed to me that GDOE was going to be in receipt of the money. And this was again on May 9th, the following couple days. Can you kind of give us the history of what happened to that $20 million?
Yes, Senator. A typhoon happened, and during the course of the discussion that we subsequently had on how to fund the recovery of that typhoon, $50 million was appropriated to typhoon recovery, and that really took out of the running the ability to send 20 million.
So just to be clear, did GDOE ever actually get any part of the $20 million?
No, sir.
No? No. Okay. So did you misspeak?
Well, what I said was true at the time,
I see.
but that was before the hurricane.
Right, yeah. I guess just my observation with this budget process, it's just to kind of expand on what the previous speaker said. There's money, but only certain people know where it is. And so I feel like we're just playing this game about show me the money that you're not going to show me. And I know you, Mr. Byrne, I've interviewed you a million times. You're not really going to volunteer any information unless we're very specific in how we ask the question, right?
Well, I think that's not an unreasonable approach to take. If you ask a specific question, I'll get a specific answer.
Right. So just back to the $20 million. So it was I know that Lester Carlson was over here in the Special Economic Service meeting, and he said that he had some discussion with the former acting superintendent about this money. That's why I'm confused, because he said that she had authorized the recalling of this $20 million, but you're saying that they never got it.
Yeah, I wasn't there, and I don't know what he said, but I think the discussion revolved around, was it necessary at that moment? And I think when we did discuss this matter, it was pointed out that DOE has a lot of federal money to spend, which they haven't spent.
But I talk with DOE every day, and that federal money is earmarked, and it's already dedicated to certain things. So just to be honest with you, they want their $20 million back, period, right? And so I just wanted to ask, that $20 million?
Perhaps you'd ask them to talk to me about it, and I will welcome an early discussion with the new superintendent.
Yeah.
Because we're here, trying to make sure that the federal money is spent. The federal money times out,
right.
So we need to make sure that it is spent.
Yeah, and I think the department is aware of that, and they actually had plans for this $20 million. So now, according to Lester and this Special Economic Service meeting, this $20 million went into a bank account with some other monies, and basically any government agency could avail this bank account and get a voucher. Is that accurate?
I don't recognize that characterization.
Well, what do you recognize about the $20 million? So it went into the Typhoon Mawar Response and Recovery Fund, and then what?
It was appropriated because this legislature appropriated $50 million from the general fund to the recovery fund. So it's available, the $50 million is available to be appropriated. We can't appropriate money twice. So the $50 million would need to be, unless the legislature chooses to change it or deal with it in some other way, the $50 million would need to be either spent or determined not to be spent before any further money could be freed up to go back to DOE.
Yes, it's my understanding, and just communicating with the Guam Department of Education, that the $20 million was taken, and they were basically told that if you want the $20 million, you have to go through Homeland Security, Civil Defense, correct?
Well, I think that's not quite the way it was expressed. Mold remediation, I am aware of.
Right. So what is the status that's the issue, is that GDOE had this money to spend, and then it was taken, and now they have to jump through these Typhoon Mawar hoops, and we're a couple weeks away from schools opening, and we're still waiting on the mold mitigation.
Senator Barnett, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're trying to stay on revenues,
Right.
revenue projections. If you're trying to ask the question whether there is additional funding that has not been spent, that was given to us, given to DOA, and that money can be used for revenues.
Yeah,
but
that's what
we'll
I mean.
try and
That's what I
stay.
mean.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator.
Stay on
Appreciate
that
it.
course, okay?
Right
Thank
on.
you.
Yes. So on that course, what she said, but what I had asked.
Well, that's kind of looking at it backwards, but recently I was made aware of it. By recently, I mean Friday. The DOA was advised to go through Homeland Security because that's FEMA access money, and the probability of being able to be reimbursed by FEMA is greater if you do it in that way. So it makes sense to do it that way. I saw the specs on Friday, and they need a little bit of dusting up, but they're on their way, and will be, I hope, that Homeland and GSA will have the bid out very quickly.
Right. So now that we have a 90-10 split, just to continue with this 20 million relative to the revenues, what is going to happen when we are reimbursed 90% for that $20 million? Where does it go after that? Does that reimbursement money go back to DOE, or does it just disappear?
Well, it goes back into the general fund, and that may allow it to go to DOE if the amount that we receive exceeds $20 million. Otherwise, it's going to be restricted, clearly.
And is that going to be the case for all of the money that we're spending relative to the Mawar response and recovery?
Is what going
Is
to
that
be the case?
where these reimbursements are coming back in and they're just going to the general fund and not necessarily to the agencies they were taken from?
Well, those agencies operate within the general fund. But you're asking me a question about what's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So that would be...
I just want to be sure
that would be a planning matter when we actually get it.
When we talk about the revenue and, whether or not this return on investment for education is going to happen with this $1.1 billion budget, I'm just trying to be sure that if we give GDOE 20 million and you guys take it, are they going to get it back? So I can look at how much money they're going to have.
Well, they're part of the general fund, so they will be able to access it as any other agency.
Is that, so is that a yes?
Is what a yes.
Is that they're going to get their $20 million back?
Obviously, that's up to the governor to determine. But if it's available, then it would be available.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Byrne.
No, I just wanted to say that, in line with the departments and agencies' addressal of their, any damages caused by Typhoon Mawar, what the directive is that they have to use current appropriations in the FY23 Budget Act to front the costs, and then from there, funds are reimbursed by FEMA. So in essence, it's not a windfall of federal funds coming in back to GovGuam. It's basically a reimbursement of costs that we're fronting. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Byrne, so these different pay plan studies, how are those funded? Like the general pay plan?
Sir, are you talking of the plan or the results
the study.
of payment? The study?
The study, yes.
They were done by DOA within its budget.
Okay, so that's why we didn't see an appropriation of that. What about recruit training cycles? I know one of the biggest obstacles seems to be an issue with, yes?
Senator, please.
Relative to the revenue, ma'am.
I don't see where it's going on asking questions on how much we're paying for something. That's expenditures.
Okay.
We're talking about revenue, so please stay within the bounds of the agreement.
I'll save the rest for the second round, ma'am.
That would be a good idea.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator.
Am I able to yield my time to Speaker Terlahi?
Unfortunately, the rules of engagement doesn't allow us to split your time up between yourself and somebody else.
Thank you.
So I would approve it, but...
Would you? We get a vote on that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
If you'd like to overrule the chair, that's fine with me. So thank you again. And Speaker Therese Terlahi, you're up.
Chairman, may I just go ahead and answer Senator Barton?
Oh, please, Mr.
About
Steve. Yes.
about the detailed breakdown of the Guam Education Facility Fund. There are a total 9 appropriations made against the fund. I'll start with the first one. That was the DOE JFK debt service. You also have the OCODU debt service. You have the GDOE operations. You also have the GOD mediation service. We also have the TGen lease. It's being appropriated from it. We have the UOG Capital Improvement Fund debt service. We also have the GCC Capital Improvement Fund. We have the GCEC operations. We have DPW bus operations. We have the public library operations. We have GETC public broadcasting operations. And the last one is the Mayor's Council Public Safety Programs.
I'm sorry, can you go back? What do you say, GETC?
The GE? What? No, the PBS. Public Broadcasting? Yeah. Then the last one was the Mayor's Council of Guam Public Safety Programs. So all those 11 agencies' programs are basically funded out of the Guam Education Facility Fund.
Can I get a copy of that?
Absolutely, I'll make a copy of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Barnett. Speaker Therese Terlahi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To follow up on that, I guess I'll just go straight into this typhoon stuff. I want to see, you said we can't appropriate twice, so you're considering the 50 million where the bill said it was authorized to, the governor's authorized to utilize up to 50 million from the general fund, that's an appropriation of 50 million?
In effect, yes.
So, and you said there were no transfers from any agencies.
I don't think I did, but it was confirmed that was the case.
All right. Were there any transfers from any agencies for these funds? Or if it says 50 million in excess that was in the general fund?
The wording said that it comes from the general fund.
BBMR?
I'm sorry, I don't, I believe we do send a report over to the legislature. Unfortunately, I don't have the latest one that was sent, but I can look into it.
Which report?
The expenditures for Typhoon Mawar.
Oh, yes. I want to get to those next. I'm just trying to figure out, did you take 50 million from the general fund and move it to another fund for typhoon?
No.
All right, so Mr. Mariano? I'm sorry, Mr. Mariano, my apologies. When you said that the agencies are required to use their existing appropriations for their relief, that's everybody except for DOE. DOE's appropriation was taken away from them, but every other agency is required to use their own appropriations, and they've had enough to cover their expenses during the typhoon?
As far as I'm aware, yes, but again, you know, a lot of these expenditures are still being incurred, and at the same time, you know, they're going to have to be reported to Guam Homeland Security for, you know, for reimbursements of any typhoon-related damage.
Okay, so spent and then reported.
Yeah, for reported for reimbursement purposes. Yeah.
All right, and that's what these reports show, which the agencies have spent and reported to Office of Homeland Security?
Yeah, I don't believe that particular one is detailed for all of the departments.
So what is this detailed for? The one that's sent to the legislature?
That's the mandated report, right? Yeah, this particular one is in line with the Public Law 3717 in terms of reporting of allocations of funds for the various. Can you see this real quick? Sorry.
Speaker, if I may, I'm going to let him answer your question with regards to that, but again, I ask, you please stay on.
This is all related to revenue, Madam Chair. We need to know where the money is laying, where it's hiding, where they are not using it in order to put it back into revenue wherever it belongs.
Okay.
Yeah, but in terms of our discussion now, we're talking about FY24 revenues. Any impact that this would have would be on current year revenues, FY23. So
perhaps, but can you just answer the question?
Those reports are mandated by Public Law 3717.
Right, the question is, are they reflecting of the agency's expenditures for Typhoon, or is this only from, or what does this show? You said it doesn't reflect the agency's expenditures for
Can I
Typhoon.
see the report again? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll go and just give me a few minutes if
Okay.
you'd like to
All right.
ask any other questions for now.
Will do, thank you, Mr. Mariano. Mr. Byrne, you said that we can't appropriate twice, so the 50 million was appropriated over and above. I don't believe it was appropriated. It says authorized to utilize, but if you're counting that as a 50 million, then the 20 million appropriation to GDOE still exists, and you can't really say that you've taken the money from DOE and put it into some other fund, because that appropriation still exists unless it's repealed.
As I indicated, Madam Speaker, they're both part of the general fund.
I can't hear you, sorry.
As I indicated, they're both part of the general fund.
Yes, they are.
DOE is in the general fund.
Correct. But the appropriations, just like to the agencies, they still exist, right?
Yes. Just like, we haven't got to the end of the year, so there are existing appropriations that
That have not been funded.
that either have or have not been funded, yes.
Correct. That's what happened with DOE. They have not received their funds. That was a cash decision made by you and the governor. But on these reports, can you just tell us, you said yesterday there was only 5.9 million expended to date. Is that from all the agencies that's going to be seeking reimbursement from FEMA? Or what is that 5.9 million? Because I can't even find the 5.9 million on these reports, or if you could walk me through them and just show me, because I want to know what is the balance from the 50, if you took the 50, or if you took the 20, what's the balance? And if it's 20 minus 5, then DOE can get the rest of that immediately.
Well, the 5.9 million, I'm not sure which report you're looking at. The report...
I'm looking at the ones that you submitted for the month of May and the month of June.
Well, we just submitted one for July, and you wrote to me...
Well, July.
You wrote to me about
July.
some details from
You submitted it... Okay.
And that has
for the month of July.
Yes. It has these are cumulative reports. And these are cumulative reports.
Okay.
And on it, there is 5.9 million
All right.
expenditure.
Well, we have not received that.
That was the one that you wrote to me about last night.
Correct. That's for the month of June. We received it on July 20 for the month of June. But I checked the records. We didn't receive any other one after that.
We just sent you a report, and I thought that was what you were referring to. But I will check the letter.
So what was the beginning balance? Because these carry balances of over $20 million. So what... I can't understand this report at all, Mr. Byrne. So if you could just tell us what you began with and what is the current balance? If you're saying you've spent 5.9 million total only cumulative.
I'm not sure why you would characterize it as only. I mean, 5.9 million is a considerable amount of money.
Right, but it's a lot less than the 20 million from the DOE was taken away from DOE, and a lot less than the 50 million that you say has been taken away from other agencies.
Yeah, Senator, I'll go in and consult with some of the staff at our office, and we'll have an answer for you hopefully later on today or by tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And if you could just maybe label, when you say balance, it doesn't show where this money came from. Like, what's it a balance of? Yeah, I don't know, maybe more detail on your reports.
Well, I believe what the information that's showing there on the report is what's mandated. So,
right.
I'll look at the format.
Yeah, you guys were very general. You listed categories like contracts, miscellaneous, salaries, fringe benefits. Supplies,
Understood.
equipment, and miscellaneous. And the miscellaneous are very significant, and we can't tell at all what those are, so I wrote a letter to Mr. Byrd asking him to detail what those are. But I just want to know, when we are going to be talking about revenue, whether, and then we appropriate the money, whether it moves to where we're appropriating it, or it goes other places. For example, if he's saying there's an outstanding 50 million appropriation. But all right, and then the information we got regarding the tax credits that was put into the drive, according to the chairman, it's not really labeled. Well, I guess it's GITA. Is this information from GITA? Was OFB able to look at this? Because in the bill, there's only 3 tax credit programs that are accounted for. There are a couple more on here that I just want to know, does OFB still stand by just the 3?
Thank you, Speaker. Yes, what we include in the budget are those tax credits that actually have a specific amount. There are other tax credits passed that give a cap, but they don't set aside a specific amount for each fiscal year.
Can you repeat that?
So yeah, there are multiple tax credits out there, but what we included in the budget is those tax credits that have a specific amount mentioned in law per fiscal year. Others have just a cap that you could spend, but there's no set-aside amount specified for the fiscal year.
All right,
so
so
these are the ones.
they might still be spent. Well, there was only a couple additional ones that are still authorized beyond 2023, it looks like. So if those are used, that would be a shortfall in our revenue, or, right, theoretically?
Theoretically, yes.
All right, and then in the latest CRER, Mr. Mariano, if is the
Point of inquiry, ma'am?
pardon?
Point of inquiry? I appreciate the question, and does the speaker have what we anticipate if it was all used?
Well, there's an additional 375,000 over the 500,000 for the Guam National Football. There's a 500,000 for Southern High School Auditorium. There's a $1 million for Guam Memorial Hospital medical equipment. Those look to be still authorized and valid, maybe not being used right now, but potentially.
Does that answer your question, Senator Blas?
Yes, it does.
Okay, just a point of information. Many of those, that report that was given to you from GITA has a limit to how much per year can be withdrawn from these accounts. So even though the you come into like the Guam Memorial equipment, it only allows a certain amount per year. Okay. So when you're looking at $5 million, it does not mean for that year $5 million will be allowed in tax credits. And some of the reports, of course, if you notice, it was done in February of 2023. The report that you have in hand, it's dated that amount. Okay, bill was recently passed to eliminate some of those balances that have been dormant for many years. So continue on, Speaker Chalahi.
Thank you. This is CRER, Mr. Mariano, for the most recent one we received, I guess, was for the month of June. Does that show all the appropriations of unaudited excess for FY23? I mean, does it account for those?
Are you referring to those appropriations that were made from the 22 excess?
Sorry, not 22, because that wouldn't need to show
No, but
here.
there were appropriations in Public Law 36107 that were from outside of FY23 revenues. Let me see. I believe it was in the area of 30-some million. Just give me a second. Yeah, so there were 713 million in appropriations made from FY23 revenues, but then we have appropriations from the FY22 2% reserve of about 13.5, and then there is the appropriations from the FY22 surplus of about 25.9 million. So To answer your question, well, the adjustment upward in the revenues for, but I'm sorry, yeah, the 852,000 showing in the June report does not factor in those appropriations that I mentioned, the 39 million that were from sources outside of the FY23 general fund revenues.
Are we still liable for those? What do you mean, sources outside?
No, again, there were some appropriations made from
Appropriations?
Yes, but again, you know, if you refer back to the details in 36107, there were those appropriations that came from FY22 general fund sources.
Not the FY22.
So this does not, the amounts in the CRAR don't include those particular appropriations.
Okay. All right. And then the I remember asking last year about that bipartisan infrastructure and receiving an explanation that at that time they didn't know how much of it we would get because of the competitive nature of it. Do we know now?
That's still obviously the nature, they're competitive. I believe the governor's office announced maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that there was, I don't actually remember whether it was 130 odd million or 150 odd million for broadband infrastructure improvement that Guam received.
And that's all?
That's all I can recall, yeah.
All right, then. On the Section 30 funds, the bill says net of war claims deduction. Is there a reason that language is there?
Not for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it actually should not be referencing net of war claims because there aren't any war claims that are taken out or that are going to be taken out of 24 Section 30.
Right. So we're receiving, well, I heard what you received last year was 70 out of less than what we estimated. And then the use of money and property, what is that for? What does that mean? There's an line item C, use of money and property under revenue.
Yes, I think I answered Senator Barnett.
That's the same?
It's the interest.
Interest,
yeah,
okay.
Basically, yeah.
And other taxes includes use tax. And that was the discussion you had regarding the use tax. Are there other things besides use tax in there?
Speaker, what are you looking at?
Under the list right before BPT, total income taxes, it says BPT, and then the tax credits, and then other taxes.
Yes, use tax will be a large part of that.
Okay. What else is there?
There's some other small taxes I don't actually remember, but maybe my colleague does.
Okay, so there's no plan according to this bill, although the governor in her submission had requested for a triennial assessment. But when you submitted your budget, it didn't show any different amount for the Guam Educational Facilities Fund. And I'm just curious about that. If they were proposing to do a triennial assessment, was it not going to be completed in the fiscal year?
So our team actually has begun to work on the specs for an RFP. It definitely won't be done in this fiscal year, but we are anticipating to complete it in the next year. You know, I was not at the department when the last revaluation, which is now a quinquennial, was done, which I believe that my understanding is that I believe the award was done in FY 2012, and the actual work was done in 2013. But the way that the real property tax certification happens is that I believe that it will have to be completed by March in order for it to be included in the next year's bill. So for example, those things that adjustments as of March 2023, those would be included in the next certification, which the Board of Equalization is required to certify the role by law by October 31, and then those certified, the certified role then gets in, the bills for the certified role get released in December, and those are for 2023 taxes, real property taxes that are due in 2024, February 20 and April 20. So that's how that works. Our team is actually working right now on the specs for the RFP. I've reached out to the AG's office because, of course, the fact that this is expected to be in excess of $500,000, we have to work with the AG's office with regards to any procurement in excess of that, and they've committed to making sure that, you know, of course, we work together on that and to assist us and support us however we need with regards to the procurement. We're hopeful that this will happen in this next year, but again, that's something we're working toward, Madam Speaker.
Is that something that will happen without legislative action?
I believe there's a section here in the Budget Act that refers to the revaluation. I forget which section.
Can OFB confirm that? I thought it was taken out. It was in the governor's submission. That's my question. So if you did do one, you wouldn't expect any actual increase in taxes until the following fiscal year, even if you did one.
That's how I believe it will work, ma'am.
Yes, it's not included in the bill.
So it was taken out by OFB in the sub-bill?
Yes.
Can you discuss the Healthy Futures Fund? It's significantly different or lower than FY23 by at least $7 million. Maybe Daphne and OFB?
Yes, Speaker, the reason why we have decreased the level is because tracking is significantly below what we authorized for 2023. Budget Act was 40 million, but BB March tracking is only 33 million.
Do you know why we were so off on that projection?
I'm not sure. I have my theories, but it's probably because there's other alternatives now to, this money is being collected from like cigarette tax, and there's other alternatives that are not being taxed, so it's probably, that's my theory.
Vaping has replaced cigarette smoking and no taxes on vaping?
Yeah, we're just...
Director?
Correct. There's no separate tax on vape.
All right. And do you agree with this estimate then? What about the cigarette stamps that you're putting out? Do you think that might have an impact to increase this revenue?
With regards to the cigarette stamp tax, actually there's going to need to be monies, of course, that is going to be appropriated to make sure that the stamps can be printed. I am not sure of the impact of the revenues with regards to the cigarette stamp taxes, but if, the idea is accountability with regards to making sure that there's tax that's already paid on all cigarettes that are sold. But I couldn't speak to how it will impact the revenues, but I know, of course, it's going to impact the expense side because there's going to need to be appropriations for the continuation of printing of stamps.
All right. And so, go ahead, Luella. All right. And then, could you just talk about in the federal grants and aid requiring local match, so Department of Public Health and Social Services has significantly increased by maybe $30 million. Do you know what that is?
I believe it's a local for the Medicaid. But this is what's been just being shown in the federal program inventory that's submitted in the budget request.
All right, and DSID as well, increase at 1 million. That means they're getting $1 million more? They're receiving $1 million more in federal grants? DSID?
Yes,
And the
that's what-
AG's receiving 2 million more?
Yes, again, these figures were derived from what is submitted in their budget request as part of their federal program inventory.
Okay, so these departments all account for these grants, and you don't really know the details of those? Okay, all right then.
Yeah, but just to clarify, Senator,
Yes.
Those are federal funds that are going to be in receipt from our providing of local appropriations to match them, based on the matching ratio. I believe DSIDS is in the neighborhood of like 79 to 21% local to federal.
All right, has anyone decreased the percentage on Guam versus increased or kept the same that you know of?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you. And then there's a provision that says that all funds in excess of revenues collected from the highway fund would go to flooding mitigation, improvement of roadways, highways, roads, or streets. But I wanted to know, what about the highway fund? It seems to be decreasing, and if you could explain that. And then did we get any money actually appropriated from that provision in the revenue section of the bill that talks about any excess would go to flood mitigation?
Well, in terms of the level, Senator, we reduced it because the trend, again, for the tax relief, the liquid fuel tax relief that was provided, and it was again extended for at least 3 months for the next fiscal year. So that's why our levels are lower.
Okay, so did any money go into that portion that says that if it was received in excess, it's currently tracking below. So no money went to flood mitigation, right? From excess highway funds, right? But are we not receiving any additional highway funds from, or would that be in the federal government side? I mean, the matching, where does that go? That does not go into this fund? Please, yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I don't have a direct answer for you right now, but that information is contained in the governor's executive budget request under the federal programs inventory.
Okay.
So there are details provided for Department of Public Works to include what we anticipate for FY24.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a significant increase in the 23.7 million, I think you said, in the debt service that we're going to be paying in this upcoming fiscal year. But none of these is new. They're just increases over the financing that we put off the increases until looks like now, and now we're paying for it. Particularly, well, these are all bonds. The big one seems to be this limited obligation bond, BPT. But is there any chance of refinancing these this year, or that you anticipate?
If I could expand on that, that BPT bond was just refinanced in fiscal 22. When that happened, we were able to release some money out of escrow that actually reduced the debt service in fiscal 23. But that can't, that's now it's released. You have to go back to a more normal debt service profile.
Are you anticipating any refinancing of any of these in fiscal year 24?
Last question.
I don't believe there's any due to be refinanced in 24.
All right, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Okay, we're going to the second round We're going to change it up a bit and start in the middle, but I want the body to know that in the second round, we are still on Chapter 12. This is the opportunity now not just to speak on revenues, but also to speak on expenditures in Chapter 12. That means federal matching grants, tax refunds, rainy day fund, revenue collections in excess, bond, general obligation bonds.
You mean Chapter 1, Madam Chair?
Chapter 1, did I say, what did I say?
You said Chapter 12.
Oh, did I? Wow. Where's my mind today? Sorry. Thank you for that correction. Chapter 1. Gee, sorry to confuse you. So again, it does include not just the revenues, but any kind of questions that will deal with expenditures dealing in Chapter 1. So we're going to start in the middle of the body where Senator Jesse Lujan will start with you first, and this will be, again, the second round, and knowingly the third round that comes into play will be for amendments into Chapter 1. Okay, so there will be a third round. Also, colleagues, I just wanted to let you know that we will be breaking around 11:30. Okay, so coming back at 2. Okay, so once we hit to 11:30, I will be, stopping it and then taking a recess until 2. Okay, Senator Lujan, you are first on the second round.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is for DRT. What all is included in the, limited gaming funds? What gaming is that that is included in limited gaming funds for $1,093,118? That bingo and what else?
I believe that the limiting gaming fund is, and if you recall, there was a court case that deemed, or where the judgment basically was that there was no more Liberty machines, symbolics, right? Those types of machines are no longer considered legal. We don't see those anymore. There is still, I believe, pachinko. There are certain things, horse race machines, I believe, as we talk with the AG's office, the prior AG, that those still were allowable. But there is primarily, I believe, it's like bingo, and of course we do see bingo with regards to, like even, for example, at the different senior citizen centers, et cetera. But those are what I understand to go into there. But in addition to bingo, like I mentioned, any other activity that wasn't deemed, so no Liberty or symbolics are included in there because, again, or shouldn't be, because those are not considered legal.
So what you're saying, so the limited gaming thing is inclusive of, say, the bingo that happens in senior citizen centers?
Yes, there is a filing that's required to be done for even for those nonprofits that undertake those types of activities. Yes. So if there's an organization that is required to, I believe my understanding is yes, Senator, that they are required to report.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but perhaps on the tax piece, I will have to confirm it. But as I've looked at the funds that we get for limited gaming, God bless you, those ones I believe also, I actually see some nonprofits that are reporting.
Yeah. How much is generated from, again, outside of the exclusive of the senior citizens bingos, the bingo. The nonprofit bingo entities that happen out there with the big payouts and things like that. Do you know how much is generated from them?
So bingo actually is only allowed to be conducted in relation to or by a actual organization that is tax exempt. So we only issue bingo permits, bingo fundraising permits to those organizations that are actually organized as nonprofit and receive tax exempt status. And that's how that works. So they're all considered, or they're all in relation or should be related to nonprofits.
Okay, so taxes, means...
Correct, and nonprofits are required by law. They file Form 990s. Their information is public. I don't have that on information.
No, because the reason why I'm asking, because, recent news, or we've read about a bingo organization, of course, that actually has seen its way into federal court. And so I'm just saying, if they're, I mean, that entity is still tax exempt at this point? Is that, I mean, are they still operating, and are they still tax exempt? I mean, I know it hasn't been adjudicated, and again, the fact that it hadn't been adjudicated, are they still in operation?
I actually apologize, Senator Lujan. I couldn't give you that information with regards to that particular case in terms of the status of their bingo permit. But you know, of course, I could check on that.
Okay. Okay. So let me change the question around. So if a nonprofit organization is operating a bingo based on its nonprofit and being granted by rev and tax, and again, if there were some issues regarding, I guess, their operations, and have been indicted at this point, again, because it's still being adjudicated and has not, it hasn't come to a conclusion at this point. What does Rev and Tax do in the meantime with that? I mean, again, because the case is not adjudicated yet, and there's no, I mean, there's no official adjudication and findings at this point. How does Rev and Tax handle that situation prior to adjudication? I mean, is it status quo?
Well, so bingo permits are, just to kind of share with you the process, right? Bingo permits are actually renewed on an annual basis, just like a business license. Okay. And bingo permit applications are required to be submitted to the department beginning November, or by November 1 of each year. And as part of the process, our team has required, for example, fingerprinting various items that you know, the people who are involved with the bingo operation are supposed to comply with. And so again, that happens on an annual basis. You know, with regards to the particular case which you're referring to, you know, of course our team is aware, and that's of course because it's been in the news. However, in terms of, you know, the action that our agency has or is, you know, going to take, some of the items are governed, some of the perhaps licenses are governed by boards. There, of course, has to be, if there is a board that's involved, there may need to be a board meeting to address action because there may not be the ability for the agency perhaps to regulate for certain items with regards to that particular matter. But our team is, of course, aware, and, you know, we do have various branches. We don't generally speak to, you know, anything that's active because, again, you know, there is similar to like if there was a GPD investigation, you don't necessarily speak to that. So, but I can say again that our agency is aware, and that you know, of course, we in the course of our usual operations, even outside of this particular case, when there are items that come to light because it is in the news or we do find out about it, we do, you know, of course, work to do our due diligence.
Sure. You know, and the reason why I'm asking this is because in that particular organization that we're talking about, my office had fielded a few calls from employees as well as winners, and having to claim and you know, in regards to remittance of their earnings and things of that nature, and unable to do so. Unable to do so from the nonprofit organization itself. So that being said, I don't know at this point if they're able to attain that from the organization and file their taxes on that. And that's what I'm saying. Because if they hadn't and weren't able to complete their tax filings, but yet the nonprofit organization is continuing on You know what I'm saying?
And I can speak to that generally.
yeah.
So in general, and of course, we've received inquiries in general about perhaps organizations maybe not issuing proper W-2s
Yeah.
or W-2s late or 1099s late. And we do, if an organization, tax exempt or not, is not submitting or filing their W-2s, 1099s on time, there are penalties that are associated with that. There is a process to report those types of issues. For example, if you are, I guess, an employee of an organization, and again, this applies to all organizations, not just this particular organization that you're referring to, there's a process, and that gets reported to our agency, of course, but really the individual who is expecting that information, we request that they come into our agency and they deal with our tax enforcement branch, and that is the process. So there is a process for that. If you do have individuals who have an issue, they can be referred to our agency so we can specifically, we can obtain their claim or their complaint or their report, and we can work to look at that. But there is a process, and I'm aware because we have received some comments or some inquiries about that, and I've advised people of the same thing I'm advising you.
Sure, and thank you, because we have received a few calls, and we have contacted Reverend Tax about that, and referring those individuals again to your office regarding that as well. But again, my concern is, and I know you can't speak on a current situation that is being adjudicated at this point, but in regards to that if they're the status quo and they continue to operate, but anyway, prior to final adjudication will determine their, I guess, their destiny. Yeah. But thank you very much. The other thing, in regards to the Chamorro Land Trust fund here, my understanding, maybe this is DOA as well, the CLTC Revenues Operations Fund is fixed in nature. Was that considered instead of a projection? The CLTC, I mean.
Yes, Senator. This fund is based on the leases collected specified in law, so it's fixed.
Okay, yeah, it's fixed. Yeah, no, I know it's fixed, but it's put down as a projection, so, but it is fixed, yeah, okay. The other thing is, as well, is, and for DOA, I guess, are the funds, again, that is remitted to the CLTC, to DOA, are they remitted to CLTC accordingly? That was collected from their, I guess, their properties and all that?
Yes, Senator.
They are remitted?
They are remitted. Yes.
Remitted, okay. Yeah. Because I remember back in, I think it's 2017, I think it was, where CLTC had to write off a little over $500,000, around $600,000, because the government was collecting CLTC money but not remitting it.
Yes, and they also put it in the wrong fund. But all that is...
Oh, they put it in the wrong fund?
Yeah, but that's all been resolved, and it's working now.
Okay.
Point of information, but that was not reimbursed. Right.
That's correct.
No, yeah, okay. Likewise, I know there are quite a few, I think the big, if I'm not mistaken, the in arrears in over, I guess, over $500,000 as well, the GICC property that's in big arrears at this point. You guys know that, right? The CLTC?
That's a matter for the commission to follow up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, I'm just saying that, yeah, they're in big time arrears. Likewise, other entities, I guess. One other question. In regards to, and the reason why I asked is because I know there's talk about universal trash pickup. In regards to the projection, is that this $19,428,501, this is the status quo, would it not? It's a status quo in the way we're paid now. This is not a universal pickup, right? It's not inclusive of a universal pickup. Can I?
Correct, Senator. It's based on what's
What
currently
it is right now,
yes.
yeah. No, because I don't want, one morning we wake up and say, we've been working on this forever, and we'll be surprised again, kind of like the health insurance situation here, that we're, yeah, because we don't, that's all I have for right now, and I'll ask that question when we get to that section, but thank you very much.
And if I may,
Yeah,
I know
go ahead.
Senator Lujan, you did ask about the taxability of the bingo at senior citizen centers, and it's not
Yes,
taxable.
it's not-
Just wanted
that's-
to,
that's what I-
I
that's
just
what-
wanted to make sure I stated that.
I was
Yeah,
going to
that's what I
jump
thought,
in on
but-
that one.
But, that's what I thought.
That's
but,
my bill, so senior senators are not.
That's what I thought, but things could have changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Lujan.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Senator Joanne Brown, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask on your Customs, Agriculture, and Quarantine Inspection Services Fund, because the general fund, as a result of the pandemic, has been subsidizing customs. What are the plans of the administration with regards to these funds versus offsetting the request of subsidy from the general fund?
Senator, if you're asking me, because I think we talked about yesterday at some length, there's expected to be a significant recovery in the customs funds. I don't know there is any action necessary from the administration.
Well, again, prior, because legislation and law was put in place for these revenues to go in to actually, address the operations of customs rather than customs being dependent on the general fund. The decision was made years ago to move it away from that. And as a result of the pandemic, the past legislatures has subsidized customs through the general fund. What action is going to be taken as they continue to increase their own revenue source? Are you going to be offsetting that of the general fund, or are they going to get a combination of both? What's the plan?
Well, that's, if I might be clear about it, that's an expenditure question, but I will attempt to marry the two things together. We heard yesterday that OFB expects a considerable recovery in customs revenues from the fees. Last year, for fiscal 22, the general fund did have to subsidize the customs fund to the order of 1.7 million. It's just over 1.7 million. If you consider the new revenues that are being proposed by OFB, that will completely obviate the need for a further subsidy. So I don't know there's any specific action required.
But is anything going to be done by the administrative side to offset as they continue to increase their own revenue source to offset what's being appropriated in the general fund to them? Or are they going to get both?
This budget proposes both.
Well, I guess it's maybe something we need to look at because, again, I think the desire, at least I would like to see it, that they're weaned off the general fund as their revenues increase so that that money can be used for other critical needs that don't have a revenue source.
Certainly.
So you're telling me we're going to give them well, I guess we'll have to ask our budget chair, we're going to give them the full amount of the subsidy and then on top of that give them their increased funds as they continue to increase.
We have to have an operational customs department. If as you know, the bulk of their revenue comes from inspection, but airline fees and airline fees. If that is insufficient, yes, the general fund has to make it up. But we're seeing a recovery, so I don't know that we need to be.
Director Burns, I totally understand that. Director Burns, I understand that. My point is, as their, as all been said, things are on the up and up. As their revenues increase, because they're almost totally dependent on general fund appropriation, As the revenues increase now that we continue to have more visitors coming in and they're doing more inspections, are you simply going to give them a combination of both, the full general fund appropriation plus all their increased revenue on top of that when they're already being subsidized?
Well, that's what I was trying to clarify. We're not going to do it. This is being proposed by OFB, this mixture. If we find that this time next year that they can stand on their own more than 2 feet, then certainly we will cause them to do so.
Yeah, I'm still at a loss here because I just, that's a mechanism that the administration can address itself in the funding source, since you simply have no problem moving money around if it's $20 million appropriated to DOE and using that for the typhoon, and now we have to find out if DOE is ever going to get their money back. So you guys are taking no steps to offset any additional revenue that Customs is generating on their own into their operations. You're just simply going to combine the subsidy of the general fund plus any additional increases they get it all? Is that what you're telling us?
Again, I would say this is not our budget, this is OFB's budget. However, if recovery of these fees allows the fund to stand on its own, and you're absolutely right, Senator.
It's not a question of even standing on its own. Incrementally, as it continues to increase, will you offset that? Because you obviously seem to have the ability to do that with money for DOE. If you can do that with $20 million for DOE,
this is a special fund, Senator. It's not the general fund. This is a special fund which was set up for that purpose that you said. If that purpose cannot be served because of the source of revenues, then the general fund steps in. If the fund can stand up by itself, then it will. I don't know that there's any need to kind of wedge monies into it, if that's what you're suggesting.
I understand. It's not a question of that. My question is because they were dependent and operating on their revenue, and as a result of the pandemic, the legislature decided, well, we're going to subsidize their operations and we're appropriating directly from the general fund. But now that their revenues are continuing to increase, is there any offset of that amount?
Yeah, if I may just go on and add on to what Director Byrne is saying. When we go through budget deliberations for FY25, that'll definitely be considered in terms of, in all likelihood, reducing their amount of general fund support, considering increase in passenger arrivals, and I believe there are also discussions in terms of adjusting their rate schedule, their fee schedule. So, in all likelihood, their general fund subsidy will be reduced, or it may be eliminated altogether, so that they'll be working directly off of their own fee collections.
Is that something you're doing during the fiscal year, or will be doing the fiscal year? You're just going to wait a whole year before that happens?
Well, we're all in August, September. We actually start looking at our budget cycle start for FY25 will actually begin in November, December of this calendar year. So it's not gonna take a full year before we take that into consideration.
I'm just saying, in all fairness to other needs of the government that, again, don't have the ability to generate its funds. And again, I just, fair is fair. That subsidy was provided at a time of need, but now that they're continuing, as we see the planes flying every day, I mean, if they're getting increased revenue, that should be offset. And I don't see why the administration itself can't address that mechanism during the budget year. Yeah, if you can move money around so easily for other things, I don't see any reason. I just think it's something to be noted. And I understand Customs has many needs, but I just don't think it should be, continue to take advantage, so to speak, of that subsidy. I mean, same thing with the Guam Visitors Bureau. That was also provided funding as a result of the TAF because of the situation that we were in with regards to the pandemic. On the GMH Pharmaceuticals Fund,
Senator, your position's noted. I would point out, however, that the Customs, that the total budget for customs is nearly 20 million. Only 6 million of this is coming from the inspection
yes,
fund.
I appreciate that, Director Burns. I attended the hearing as I do most budget hearings. I'm cognizant of that. But again, my point is, as those revenues continue to increase, I'd like to see an offset to the general fund so that they return back to their funding source.
We will be sure to look at it.
Which to me is fair.
We will be sure to look at it when that happens.
Moving on, the GMH Pharmaceutical Fund is at 21.7 million anticipated revenues. But I want to note, during the budget hearing for GMH, they had listed 33 million, even though it had been pointed out during the hearing that the actual fund this past fiscal year has been bringing in far less than that. What's your response to that? Because I'm a little concerned, especially since GMH, even though we're not at expenditures, reported there's about 22 million that's still owed to vendors. So it's nice to know the money's flowing, but there are $22 million worth of money that's owed to vendors that have not been paid yet for whatever reason. How's the administration going to address the difference of almost 33 million that they had put in their budget? As the chairman recalls, it was eye-opening. They identified that on their budget as 33 million. And yet we're looking here at only maybe 21.7 million.
Senator,
how are we going to make up the extra 10?
Yes, Senator, if I may answer. When GMH came and during their testimony with their budget hearing, they indicated I believe a $33 million amount to be received from the pharmaceutical fund.
Yes.
I'm not too sure where they got that amount from, thinking that maybe the BBT was 400 million, because if you take the percentage of 6.19 against the BBT, that's basically the allocation for the pharmaceutical fund. So the amount that we're proposing on the BBT is about 350 million. So their percentage of that 6.19 came up to about 21.7 million. So again, I don't know how they calculated the $33 million coming from the pharmaceutical fund. If they're saying that 33 million is what they need, then it's probably just an amount not necessarily from the pharmaceutical fund, but maybe in totality, maybe a combination of pharmaceutical fund and maybe a subsidy of general fund.
Yeah, but I recall the Fino English and numbers in writing, it was 33 million specifically from the pharmaceuticals fund.
Well, on top of the 21.7...
Maybe they have a greater need, but that's what they put there.
Actually, the amount that they're requesting, I believe, is like 32 million. Remember, we right now in the pharmaceutical fund, I think we're appropriating about 21.7, but we're also giving them a general fund subsidy of 8.1. So it's almost close to the 30 million they're asking.
Well, I just want to bring that up because that's a big gap. Yeah, just make sure we note that because, and that was pointed out to them at the hearing. I didn't seem to get that registered on any part of them that they were going to amend it, but that's what was made very clear to them. I know Senator Teller repeated that a few times. I'm not going to touch too long on it because I know we're dealing with revenues, but I think at an appropriate time the questions that Senator Lujan had brought up with regards to these bingo issues, I'm sure we're going to see more enlightenment when this federal case happens. I'm looking forward to hearing about it, but my office has also received a number of calls and complaints about the regulation of these nonprofits. There are 3 of them out there that are remaining. And maybe another day and time, if the oversight chair, probably we should have an oversight specifically on the regulation of that, on the revenues that are coming in, the monies that are being made, whether or not those funds are even being reported to revenue tax, whether tax is even being paid on it. Because my goodness, if there's any truth to the allegations that were made in that federal case that over $30+ million of bingo funds from this nonprofit were used for or put away in accounts wherever, that's a substantial amount. I never realized there was that much money moving around and circulating in bingo, including allegations that they're also playing other games, other gambling that's going on at these locations where money's being moved around and there's no proper regulation according to these allegations by revenue tax. So I just want to note that for the record, because again, if we are losing revenue or there's shenanigans going on and money's going where it's not supposed to be going and the money that's supposed to be going into our tax coffers are not, I think that's something we need to look at. With that, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions at this point.
Thank you, Senator Brown. My colleagues, we're going to recess until 2 o'clock. Thank you.